The Great Steel Strike of 1919, Gary, Indiana. Timeline. 1892, Homestead Strike. In 1892, the Carnegie Steel Company workers began to strike with the help of the AA, the Amalgamated Association of Iron and Steel Workers. All striking workers were fired, and Carnegie hired Pinkertons, a group of private security guards, to protect the steel mill. Workers and guards clashed, and 14 people in total were killed. 1898, First Merger. In 1898, the Illinois Steel Company acquired 4 smaller companies: Minnesota Iron Company, Lorraine Steel Company, Johnson Company of Pennsylvania and Elgin, Joliet, and Eastern Railway. This new conglomerate was called the Federal Steel Company, and Elbert Henry Gary became the company's president. In 1901, Second Merger. In 1901, the Federal Steel Company, Carnegie Steel Company, and the National Steel Company merged to form U.S. Steel. The merger was funded by J.P. Morgan, and Charles Schwab was named the president of the new mega corporation, a position he would hold for 2 years. 1903. Schwab resigns. Elbert Gary is named the new chairman of the board of U.S. Steel.
In 1906, Gary, Indiana is founded by U.S. Steel as the spot of their new steel mill. The city is named after Elbert Henry Gary, chairman of U.S. Steel. From 1914 to 1918, as World War I increases the demand for steel to develop materials, steel becomes a major industry, employing a large number of people. On September 22, 1919, over 300,000 U.S. Steel employees across the United States go on strike, including in Gary, Indiana. Workers demand fewer hours, better pay, and better working conditions. The AA, as well as black union organizers for the NW Indiana Allied Iron and Steel Council, Lewis H. Caldwell and C.D. Elston, helped motivate and organize strikers. In response, Elbert Gary brings in 30,000 black non-union workers from the South to keep the mill running. On October 5, 1919, striking steelworkers successfully stop a trolley car carrying replacement workers. During the unrest, a strike supporter is hit with a brick. Police are called, and the next day, many anti-union legacy papers brand the events as a race riot. On October 6, 1919, the mayor of Gary orders the Indiana State Militia to impose martial law on the city. Later, federal troops are brought into Gary, and the entire city is under military control. All protests and strikes are suppressed and strictly prohibited. In November of 1919, the U.S. steel strike was over. None of the demands of the striking workers were met until years later. To this day, many mainstream media outlets maintain that the strike failed due to racial divisions between workers, even though there is little proof to support this conclusion. United States steelworker in 1919, according to the New York Times. Though employees worked 66 hours per week on average, their income ranged between 42 cents and 75 cents per hour, earning a wage that fell short of the minimum comfort level for families of 5. The multi-million-dollar corporation was privately owned, so the government was not aware of the magnitude of the poor conditions. The industry's demand was apparent. Profit raised from $135 million in 1914 to $493 million in 1919. Unions provide worker protections, and steel workers were denied the ability to unionize. The wide diversity of employees was intentional, as it led to language barriers that conflicted with employees communicating with each other about what was going on. Finally, on September 22, 1919, the workers had enough. 365,600 workers went on strike against the steel Corporation. In the New York Times issue from September 23, 1919, the day after steelworkers went on a strike, the headline reads, 13 shot in steel strike clashes. Most districts quiet. Organizers report 279,100 workers out on first day. Many Pittsburgh mills open. Western fields harder hit. Below it reads, Union and mills confident. Steel Corporation asserts it can operate big plants at near normal. Says strikers are unskilled foreigners and that more have reported for night shift. Ohio district is hard hit. 3 mills shut down in Youngstown, 16 in Cleveland, others badly crippled. The New York Times tells the story from the large corporation's perspective and appeals to the masses rather than the steel workers.
The New York Times wasn't the only news source covering the dispute in Gary. There were many black-owned newspapers telling the story in a much different light. For example, in an excerpt from a story ran by the Chicago Whip, a black-owned newspaper, labor organizers requested for the press not to stoke racial tensions. The story also mentioned how black workers supported the union effort under the promise that they would be treated equally in the workplace. And unlike most legacy media outlets, at the time, the Chicago Whip reported that in fact there wasn't infighting between the European and black workers, and that the, quote, colored committee was received by all white labor with great applause. They even reported on how the Central Labor Union sent a letter to, quote, colored leaders on their great support, mentioning that they had backing of all steel unions in the Calumet region, an area of land stretching from northeastern Illinois to northwestern Indiana. The full excerpt of the story written in the Chicago Whip reads as followed. Avert race war in Gary. Gary leaders in timely move visited the newspaper offices and requested the capitalistic press not to print any news during the great steel strike that would inflame race hatred. They visited and addressed the Labor Council and in manly speech told the attitude of the race toward labor. Attorney General Arthur J. Davis urged that black labor would support labor unions only upon terms of equal working conditions and equal representations. The conduct of the Colored Committee was received by all white labor with great applause, and ill feeling was removed. It had been their general impression that all Negroes would prove scabs. The following resolution expresses the sentiment of all the Calumet region toward the committee. Letter to the colored leaders on their good support. At the meeting of the Central Labor Union at Hammond, Wednesday night, the following letter was prepared and adopted and ordered publishing, and the copy sent to the following: Lewis A. H. Caldwell, J. Arthur Davis, Joseph H. Rapier, attorneys, and J. D. Cook, gentlemen. Wanted, a large number of ladies to be our agents. No canvassing, good money. For details, address TEB, care of the Chicago Whip, 3457 South State Street.